Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest secrets. Sometimes the soldier everyone underestimates has already walked through fire that would break most people. And sometimes what looks like weakness is actually the strongest kind of courage you'll ever see. Sarah Martinez learned this truth the hard way when she stepped off the bus at Fort Benning, Georgia, on a sweltering August morning in 2019. At barely 5'2" inches tall and weighing just 115 pounds, she looked like a strong wind could knock her over. Her fellow recruits took one look at her and decided she didn't belong there. They had no idea that the small tattoo hidden beneath her collar told a story that would change everything they thought they knew about strength, survival, and what it really means to serve your country. What happened next would shake the entire base to its core and remind everyone that heroes don't always look like what you expect. This is the true story of how one young woman's past became the key to everyone's future, and how the very thing that made her different became exactly what made her extraordinary. The Georgia heat hit Sarah Martinez like a wall the moment she stepped off the air-conditioned bus. The humidity was thick enough to cut with a knife, and sweat immediately began beading on her forehead as she grabbed her single duffel bag from the pile of luggage, being roughly handled by drill sergeants. Around her, dozens of other young recruits were doing the same, but Sarah felt utterly alone in the crowd. She had been quiet during the entire 12-hour bus ride from her hometown in Arizona, while other recruits shared stories about why they joined the military. Sarah kept to herself, staring out the window and thinking about the letter she had left on her kitchen table. A letter that her neighbors would find when they came looking for her. A letter that explained why she had to leave, why she couldn't stay in that small desert town anymore, and why the military was her only escape from a past that threatened to destroy her. The drill sergeant's voice cut through her thoughts like a razor blade. "Listen up, maggots. You are no longer civilians. You are now property of the United States Army. You will move when I say move. You will breathe when I say breathe. And you will think when I say think." His voice echoed across the concrete platform where nearly 100 new recruits stood in the blazing sun. Sarah tried to stand as straight as possible, but next to the other recruits, she looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. The young man to her right was at least 6 feet tall and looked like he could bench press a car. The woman to her left had arms like tree trunks and a jaw that could crack walnuts. Everyone seemed bigger, stronger, and more confident than Sarah felt. As they were herded toward the processing building, she caught snippets of conversation from the recruits around her. "Did you see that tiny girl? She'll be gone by the end of the week," another voice chimed in. "I give her 3 days, max. This ain't no summer camp." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept walking. She had heard worse things said about her before, much worse. The comments from strangers were nothing compared to the words that had been thrown at her by people who were supposed to love and protect her. She touched the high collar of her shirt unconsciously, making sure it was still properly covering the small tattoo at the base of her neck. The processing building was a maze of lines, paperwork, and medical examinations. Sarah was shuffled from station to station along with everyone else, getting her head shaved, receiving her uniforms, and filling out endless forms. At the medical station, a tired-looking army medic barely glanced at her as he went through the routine examination. "Any tattoos?" he asked, not looking up from his clipboard. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Yes, sir. One small one." "Where?" "Base of my neck, sir." The medic made a note without asking to see it. Tattoos were common among recruits, and as long as they weren't offensive or in forbidden locations, they weren't a problem. He had no way of knowing that Sarah's tattoo wasn't just body art. It was a symbol. A mark that carried more weight than anyone in that building could possibly understand. After processing, the recruits were assigned to their barracks. Sarah found herself in a building with 30 other women, all of whom seemed to know exactly what they were doing, while Sarah felt lost and overwhelmed. Her assigned bunk was in the middle of the bay, surrounded by women who had already begun forming friendships and alliances. Her bunkmate was a tall redhead named Jessica, from Ohio, who had played college basketball before deciding to join the Army. "So, what made you want to become a soldier?" Jessica asked as they unpacked their gear. Sarah carefully folded her civilian clothes and placed them in her footlocker. "I needed a fresh start," she said simply. "Yeah, me too," Jessica replied. "I was getting nowhere with my degree, and my boyfriend was a total loser. The Army seemed like a good way to get my life on track." She looked at Sarah more closely. "You seem really young. How old are you?" 19. Sarah answered, which was true, though she felt much older than that. "I'm 22. Where are you from?" "Arizona, a small town you've probably never heard of." Sarah hoped Jessica wouldn't push for more details. She wasn't ready to talk about the place she had left behind, the place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets had a way of destroying families, and where sometimes the only way to survive was to disappear completely. That evening, after a dinner of bland food in a noisy cafeteria, the recruits returned to their barracks for what their drill sergeant called personal time. It was supposed to be time to write letters home, organize their gear, and get ready for the challenges ahead. Sarah sat on her bunk and pulled out a notebook, but instead of writing a letter, she just stared at the blank page. Around her, other recruits were chatting, laughing, and sharing stories about their families. Sarah listened but didn't participate. She heard about loving parents who were proud of their children's decision to serve, about siblings who looked up to them, about high school sweethearts who promised to wait for them. Sarah had none of these things to share. "What about you, Sarah?" asked a woman named Maria from the bunk across from her. "Who are you writing to?" Sarah looked up, realizing that she had been sitting with her pen hovering over the blank paper for several minutes. "No one special," she said quietly. "Come on, everybody's got somebody," Maria pressed. "Parents? Boyfriend? Best friend?" Sarah felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "My family situation is complicated," she said, hoping that would be enough to end the conversation. But Maria wasn't easily deterred. "Complicated how? Divorced parents? Overprotective dad? Crazy ex-boyfriend?" Several other recruits had stopped their own activities to listen to the conversation. Sarah felt their eyes on her and wished she could just disappear. "It's not really something I like to talk about," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, come on," said another recruit named Brandy. "We're all going to be living together for the next few months. We might as well get to know each other. What's the big secret?" Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her collar again, and she felt the small raised edges of her tattoo through the fabric of her shirt. The secret wasn't just her family situation. The secret was why she had that tattoo, what it represented, and why she could never go back to the life she had left behind. "I just prefer to keep my personal life private," Sarah said, closing her notebook and standing up. "I'm going to take a shower." She grabbed her toiletry bag and headed toward the bathroom, leaving behind a group of curious and slightly annoyed recruits. She could hear them whispering as she walked away, probably speculating about what she was hiding and why she was being so secretive. In the shower, Sarah let the lukewarm water wash over her and tried to prepare herself for the weeks ahead. She had known that military training would be physically demanding, but she hadn't fully considered how challenging it would be to live in such close quarters with so many people. In her small hometown, she had learned to blend into the background, to avoid drawing attention to herself. Here, there was nowhere to hide. As she dried off and got ready for bed, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror above the sink. Her newly shaved head made her look even smaller and more vulnerable than usual. But more importantly, it made the small tattoo at the base of her neck more visible. She would have to be very careful about keeping it covered. The tattoo was small, no bigger than a quarter, and to most people it would look like nothing more than an abstract design. But Sarah knew exactly what it was, and she knew that if the wrong person ever saw it and understood its meaning, her new life in the military could be over before it ever really began. Back in the barracks, the lights had been turned off and most of the recruits were settling down for the night. Sarah climbed into her narrow bunk and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Around her, she could hear whispered conversations, quiet crying from homesick recruits, and the sounds of people trying to get comfortable in an uncomfortable place. Jessica leaned over from the top bunk. "Hey," she whispered, "don't let Maria get to you. She means well, but she's kind of nosy. You don't have to share anything you don't want to." "Thanks," Sarah whispered back, surprised by the kindness in Jessica's voice. "We all have reasons for being here," Jessica continued. "Some of them are easier to talk about than others. You'll find your place. Just give it time." As Sarah lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of the barracks settling down for the night, she thought about Jessica's words. She wanted to believe that she would find her place here, that she could start over and build a new life. But she also knew that the past had a way of catching up with people. no matter how far they ran or how well they tried to hide. The tattoo on her neck was proof of that. It was a reminder of things she wanted to forget, of people she needed to stay away from, and of a life that had nearly destroyed her. Tomorrow, her real training would begin, and she would have to find a way to be strong enough to survive it while keeping her secret safe. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept racing. She thought about the letter she had left behind, about the people who were probably looking for her, and about whether joining the military had been the right choice. She thought about the small town where she had grown up, where everyone knew everyone else's business, where her family's reputation had been destroyed by secrets and lies. Most of all, she thought about the events that had led her to get the tattoo in the first place. Events that had changed everything about her life and forced her to make choices that 19-year-old girls should never have to make. Events that had taught her what real courage looked like, even when that courage came with a terrible price. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to meet, and new ways to prove herself. Sarah fell asleep hoping that she would be strong enough to face whatever came next, and that her past would stay buried long enough for her to build a future worth fighting for. The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, jolting Sarah awake from a restless sleep filled with dreams about home. Around her, 30 other women scrambled out of their bunks, rushing to get dressed and ready for their first day of real military training. Sarah moved quickly but methodically, having learned early in life that panic never helped any situation. Drill Sergeant Martinez burst through the barracks door like a hurricane. "You have exactly 4 minutes to get yourselves outside in formation. If you're not ready, you'll be doing push-ups until I get tired of watching you struggle." His voice echoed off the concrete walls, and several recruits jumped as if they'd been shot. Sarah noticed the irony that she shared a last name with her drill sergeant, but she kept the observation to herself. She had learned long ago that drawing any kind of attention, even positive attention, was usually a mistake. She finished tying her boots and fell in line with the other recruits as they rushed outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The formation was a disaster. Nobody knew where they were supposed to stand, people were bumping into each other, and the drill sergeant's frustration was growing by the second. "What is this mess?" he shouted. "You people look like a herd of confused cattle. Martinez, Sarah, front and center." Sarah's heart sank as she stepped forward. Being singled out on the first day was exactly what she had been hoping to avoid. She stood at attention in front of Drill Sergeant Martinez, trying to keep her expression neutral while her mind raced through possible reasons why he had called her out. "So, Martinez," the drill sergeant said, walking in a circle around her. "Same last name as me. You think that makes you special? You think you deserve some kind of special treatment?" "No, sir," Sarah replied, her voice as strong as she could make it. "I hope not, because from where I'm standing, you look like you belong in a high school classroom, not on my training field." "You're what, 16? 17? 19, sir," Sarah corrected, though she knew her small stature made her look much younger. 19? Drill Sergeant Martinez laughed, and several of the other recruits snickered. "Well, 19-year-old Martinez, let's see if you can do 19 push-ups without collapsing. Drop and give me 20. Sarah immediately dropped to the ground and began doing push-ups. Her form was perfect, her breathing controlled, and she completed all 20 without any sign of struggle. She had been doing push-ups every morning for the past 2 years as part of preparing herself for this moment. When she finished, she jumped back to her feet and stood at attention. The drill sergeant looked slightly surprised but didn't let it show in his voice. "Not bad, Martinez. But push-ups aren't going to save you when we start running. I bet you can't even make it a mile without collapsing." "I can run, sir," Sarah said simply. "We'll see about that. Formation. We're starting with a nice, easy 3-mile run. Anyone who falls out will be recycled to the next group. Let's go." The group began jogging through the pre-dawn darkness, their boots hitting the pavement in an uneven rhythm that would eventually, hopefully, become synchronized. Sarah settled into a pace near the middle of the group, not wanting to stand out by being either too fast or too slow. As they ran, she could hear conversations happening around her. Some recruits were already struggling, their breathing labored and their steps faltering. Others seemed to be barely warmed up, jogging easily and talking as if they were on a casual stroll through the park. "That little girl is going to drop out before we hit the first mile marker," she heard someone say between heavy breaths. "Poor thing probably thought this was going to be like cheerleading practice," another voice added. Sarah kept her breathing steady and her pace consistent. Running had become her escape over the past few years. When life at home became too intense, when the situation with her family became unbearable, she would put on her running shoes and disappear into the desert outside her town. She had run through anger, through fear, through grief, and through loneliness. 3 miles was nothing compared to some of the distances she had covered when she was running away from memories that threatened to overwhelm her. By the 2-mile mark, several recruits had dropped out of the formation, walking along the side of the road with their hands on their hips, gasping for breath. Sarah was still running steadily, not even breathing hard. A few of the stronger runners had noticed and were looking at her with surprise. "Hey, Tiny!" called out a recruit named Stevens who was running near her. "You doing okay over there?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied without changing her breathing pattern. "Where did you learn to run like that? You're barely breathing hard." Sarah didn't answer immediately. The truth was that she had learned to run out of necessity. When you lived in a house where violence could explode without warning, when you needed to get away fast and couldn't depend on anyone else to help you, running became a survival skill. But she couldn't tell Stevens that. "I ran track in high school," she said instead, which was partially true. She had run track her freshman year before everything in her life fell apart. When they finished the 3-mile run, Sarah was among the first half of the group to cross the finish line. She wasn't the fastest runner, but she hadn't struggled at all. Drill Sergeant Martinez looked at her with something that might have been respect, though his expression remained stern. "Apparently Martinez can run," he announced to the group. "Too bad the Army needs more than just runners. Today we're going to find out what else you can do." The rest of the day was a blur of activities designed to test every aspect of their physical and mental capabilities. They did obstacle courses, weapon handling training, and team-building exercises. Sarah approached each challenge methodically, drawing on skills she didn't even realize she possessed. During the obstacle course, her small size actually became an advantage. She could crawl through tight spaces that larger recruits struggled with, and her light weight made climbing easier than it was for bulkier soldiers. When they reached the rope climb, several of the bigger recruits struggled to pull their own body weight up the 30-foot rope. Sarah scaled it smoothly, using technique rather than brute strength. "Where did you learn to climb like that?" Jessica asked as they moved to the next obstacle. Sarah almost smiled at the memory. "I had to get into my bedroom window a lot when I was younger," she said. What she didn't mention was that she had learned to climb because sometimes coming through the front door wasn't safe, especially when her stepfather had been drinking and looking for someone to take his anger out on. During weapons training, Sarah's concentration and attention to detail impressed the instructors. She listened carefully to every instruction, asked clarifying questions, and handled the equipment with respect and precision. Growing up in Arizona, she had learned to shoot when she was 12 years old, though not for recreation. Her mother's second husband had insisted that everyone in the house know how to defend themselves, though Sarah had later realized that the real danger wasn't from strangers breaking in. "Martinez has good form," the weapons instructor commented to Drill Sergeant Martinez during the training session. "Natural shooter. Steady hands, good focus." But despite her success with the physical challenges, Sarah continued to struggle with the social aspects of military life. During mealtimes, she sat quietly and ate quickly, avoiding the conversations happening around her. When other recruits shared stories about their families or their reasons for joining the Army, Sarah found excuses to be somewhere else. The problem wasn't that the other recruits were unfriendly. Many of them tried to include her in conversations and activities. The problem was that Sarah didn't know how to be part of a group without revealing things about herself that needed to stay hidden. Every question about her background, every casual inquiry about her family, every invitation to share a story felt like walking through a minefield. "You know, Martinez," said Maria one evening as they were cleaning their weapons, "you're kind of a mystery. You're obviously tough, you can run and climb and shoot better than half the guys in our sister company, but you act like you're afraid of your own shadow when we're just sitting around talking." Sarah concentrated on cleaning her rifle, running the cloth through the barrel with careful precision. "I'm just not much of a talker," she said, "but don't you miss your family? Don't you want to share stories about home? We've been here 2 weeks, and I don't think any of us know anything about you except your name and the fact that you can outrun most of us." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever anyone asked about her family. The truth was that she did miss her family, Or at least she missed what her family could have been. She missed her little brother, who was probably wondering why she had left without saying goodbye. She missed her mother, who had tried her best in impossible circumstances, but she also felt relief every day that she woke up and didn't have to worry about what mood her stepfather would be in, whether there would be enough food in the house, or whether today would be the day when his anger finally went too far. "My family situation is complicated," Sarah said, using the same phrase she had used on her first night. "I'd rather focus on the future than talk about the past." Maria exchanged a look with Jessica, and Sarah caught the gesture. She knew they were starting to think there was something wrong with her, some reason why she was so secretive. The irony was that they were right, but not in the way they imagined. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she thought about the tattoo on her neck and what it represented. She thought about the day she had gotten it, about the fear and determination that had driven her to walk into that tattoo parlor in the next town over from where she lived. She thought about what the symbol meant, about the organization it represented, and about why carrying that mark was both the bravest and most dangerous thing she had ever done. The tattoo wasn't just body art. It was a badge of honor from a group that most people had never heard of, a group that existed in the shadows to help people who had nowhere else to turn. Sarah had become part of that group, not by choice, but by necessity, when her own life had been threatened and the official channels had failed to protect her. Getting the tattoo had been part of the initiation process, but it had also been a promise that she would help others who found themselves in similar situations, that she would be part of a network of people who understood what it meant to survive in impossible circumstances. The small symbol on her neck connected her to women across the country who had faced similar challenges and found ways to fight back. But being part of that network also meant carrying secrets that could never be shared. It meant knowing things about organized crime, about underground networks, and about people who would kill to keep their activities hidden. Sarah had left her hometown not just to escape her own situation, but because staying there would have put other people in danger. The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. During hand-to-hand combat training, Sarah's size continued to work against her in obvious ways, but her instructors noticed that she had an unusual understanding of defensive techniques. She knew how to fall without getting hurt, how to break free from holds, and how to use an attacker's momentum against them. "Where did you learn moves like that, Martinez?" asked Sergeant Williams, the hand-to-hand combat instructor. "Self-defense classes," Sarah answered, which was technically true, though those classes hadn't been held in a gym or a community center. They had been held in abandoned warehouses and empty parking lots, taught by women who had learned the hard way that sometimes the only person you could depend on to save your life was yourself. As the days passed, Sarah continued to excel at the physical aspects of training while struggling with the social elements. She was developing a reputation as someone who was competent and reliable, but also mysterious and possibly troubled. Some recruits admired her abilities, others were suspicious of her secrecy, and a few were starting to actively dislike her for reasons they couldn't quite articulate. The tension came to a head during the third week of training, when a recruit named Davidson decided to confront Sarah directly about what he saw as her attitude problem. "What's your deal, Martinez?" Davidson said loudly during dinner, making sure everyone in their section of the cafeteria could hear. "You think you're better than the rest of us? Too good to talk to people? Too good to be part of the team?" Sarah looked up from her meal, which she had been eating in silence as usual. Davidson was a big guy from Texas who had played football in high school and seemed to think that gave him some kind of authority over smaller recruits. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Sarah said quietly. "Then why do you act like it? Why do you sit there like a robot every day, not talking to anybody, not sharing anything about yourself? We're supposed to be a unit, but you act like you're on some kind of secret mission." Several other recruits were watching the confrontation with interest, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of anxiety that came with being the center of attention. "I'm just a private person," she said. "Private?" Davidson laughed. "Lady, we're in the army. There is no private. We eat together, sleep together, train together, and fight together. But you act like you're above all that, like you've got some kind of secret that makes you special." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously toward her collar, and Davidson caught the gesture. "What's that about?" he said, his voice getting more aggressive. "You keep touching your neck like that. What are you hiding under there?" Some kind of gang tattoo? Prison ink? The cafeteria had gotten quieter, and Sarah realized that more people were listening to the conversation than she had thought. She felt trapped, cornered in a way that brought back memories she didn't want to revisit. "It's nothing," she said. "If it's nothing, then show us," Davidson pressed. "Come on, Martinez. Stop being so mysterious and just show us what you're hiding." Sarah stood up slowly, her meal only half finished. She could feel the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes on her, and she knew that whatever she said next would determine how the rest of her training experience went. She could try to deflect, make up some story about the tattoo, or continue to refuse to discuss it. But any of those choices would only make the situation worse. "Some things are private for good reasons," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. "And sometimes respecting someone's privacy is more important than satisfying your curiosity." Davidson stood up as well, and Sarah realized that he was at least a foot taller than her and probably outweighed her by 80 pounds. "You know what I think, Martinez? I think you're hiding something that could affect all of us. I think you're some kind of security risk, and I don't want to serve alongside someone I can't trust." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah knew that if Davidson's suspicions spread, if other recruits started to question her background and her loyalty, her military career could be over before it began. And if that happened, she would have to return to a life that no longer existed, to a town where people who wanted to hurt her were probably still looking for her. She looked around the cafeteria at the faces watching her, some curious, some concerned, some hostile. These people were supposed to become her brothers and sisters in arms, but right now they felt like strangers who might turn against her at any moment. Sarah realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue trying to hide her past and hope that no one dug too deeply into her background, or she could find some way to build trust without revealing secrets that could destroy everything she was trying to build. The choice she made in the next few moments would determine not just her future in the military, but whether she would ever be able to truly belong anywhere. Sarah looked directly at Davidson, her brown eyes steady despite the fact that her heart was racing. The entire cafeteria seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would play out. She could walk away, try to defuse the situation, or continue to deflect his questions. But something deep inside her, something that had been building for weeks of isolation and suspicion, finally snapped. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made Davidson take a step back. "You think I'm some kind of security risk because I don't share every detail of my personal life with strangers?" Davidson crossed his arms. "Yeah, I do. Normal people don't act like you do. Normal people don't have secrets that they guard like state secrets." Sarah almost laughed at the irony of his words. If only he knew how close to the truth he was. "You're right about one thing, Davidson. I'm not normal. But not for the reasons you think." Before Davidson could respond, Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared beside their table, as if he had materialized out of thin air. "Is there a problem here, recruits?" Both Sarah and Davidson snapped to attention. "No, sir," Davidson said quickly. "Yes, sir," Sarah said at the same time, earning surprised looks from the recruits around them. Drill Sergeant Martinez looked between them, his expression unreadable. "Martinez, Sarah. Davidson, James. My office. Now. The rest of you, finish your meals and get ready for evening training." The drill sergeant's office was a small, sparse room with metal furniture and motivational posters on the walls. Sarah and Davidson stood at attention while Drill Sergeant Martinez sat behind his desk, looking at them with the expression of a man who had dealt with thousands of recruit conflicts over the years. "Sit down, both of you," he said finally. "Davidson, you first. What's your problem with Martinez?" Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, I think Private Martinez is hiding something that could affect unit cohesion and possibly security. She won't talk about her background, she doesn't participate in normal social activities, and she acts suspicious whenever anyone asks her personal questions." Drill Sergeant Martinez looked at Sarah. "Is that accurate, Martinez?" "Partially, sir," Sarah replied. "I am private about my personal life. But I haven't done anything to compromise security or unit cohesion. I complete all my training requirements, I follow all orders, and I don't cause problems for other recruits." "But you don't make friends either," Davidson interjected. "You don't trust anybody, and that makes it hard for anybody to trust you." Drill Sergeant Martinez held up a hand to silence Davidson. "Martinez, I've been watching you for 3 weeks. Your performance has been exemplary in every measurable way. Your scores are in the top 10% of your class, your attitude is professional, and your instructors have nothing but positive things to say about your work ethic. He paused and looked directly at her. But Davidson isn't entirely wrong. You do keep to yourself in a way that's unusual even for recruits who are naturally introverted. Sarah felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had hoped that her performance would speak for itself, that she could earn acceptance through competence rather than personal connections. But it seemed that wasn't going to be enough. Sir, some people have backgrounds that are difficult to discuss, Sarah said carefully. That doesn't make them untrustworthy. It just makes them private. What kind of background? Drill Sergeant Martinez asked. Sarah hesitated. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that eventually someone would ask direct questions that she couldn't deflect. But she hadn't expected it to happen so soon, or in front of someone like Davidson, who was clearly looking for reasons to doubt her. Sir, my family situation was complicated. There were some safety issues that required me to leave my hometown. I joined the Army partly to start over, and partly because I needed to be somewhere where my past couldn't follow me. Davidson leaned forward. Safety issues? What kind of safety issues? Are you running from the law? Gang problems? Drug debts? No, Sarah said firmly. Nothing like that. Drill Sergeant Martinez studied her face carefully. Martinez, I need you to be more specific. If there are people looking for you, if there are legal issues in your background, or if there's any reason why serving in the military might put you or others at risk, I need to know about it. Sarah felt trapped between the need to protect her secrets and the need to maintain her position in the Army. She looked at Davidson, who was watching her with suspicious eyes, and then at Drill Sergeant Martinez, who seemed genuinely concerned rather than hostile. She made a decision that would change everything. Sir, I was part of a witness protection situation. Unofficial witness protection. There was a domestic violence case involving organized crime connections, and I had information that certain people didn't want to become public. The situation became dangerous enough that I had to leave everything behind and start over somewhere new. The room went completely silent. Davidson's expression changed from suspicion to shock, and Drill Sergeant Martinez leaned back in his chair, processing what she had told him. Are you telling me that you're in hiding from organized crime? Drill Sergeant Martinez asked. Not exactly, sir. The immediate danger has passed, but my identity was compromised in my hometown. I needed to disappear and build a new life somewhere else. The military seemed like the best way to do that while also serving my country. Davidson looked confused. But witness protection is handled by the federal government. They relocate people and give them new identities. Why would you have to do it unofficially? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the part of the story that she had hoped never to have to tell. The part that would reveal just how complicated her background really was. The official channels failed, sir. The case never went to trial because key witnesses disappeared or recanted their testimony. The people involved were never prosecuted, but they knew that I had information that could still hurt them if it ever became public. What kind of information? Drill Sergeant Martinez asked. Sarah's hand moved to her collar again, and this time she didn't try to stop herself. Information about a human trafficking operation that was using local businesses as fronts. Information about police officers and local politicians who were being paid to look the other way. Information about where money was being laundered and how young women were being recruited and transported. The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah had never told anyone the complete story before, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that keeping it inside never had. My stepfather was involved, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't just a drunk who couldn't keep a job. He was a recruiter. He would identify vulnerable girls from broken families or girls who were struggling in school, and he would introduce them to people who promised them better lives in bigger cities. Most of those girls were never seen again. Davidson's face had gone pale. How did you find out? Sarah looked down at her hands, which were clenched tightly in her lap. He tried to recruit me. When I refused, when I started asking questions, he became violent. My mother tried to protect me, but she was scared too. That's when I started documenting everything I could find, taking pictures, recording conversations when I could do it safely. Why didn't you go to the police? Drill Sergeant Martinez asked. I did, sir. I went to the local police and they told me they would investigate. But nothing happened. Months went by, and I started to realize that some of the officers I had talked to were the same ones who had been protecting my stepfather's operation. That's when I got connected to a network of people who help in situations where the official system has failed. What kind of network? Davidson asked, though his tone had completely changed from suspicion to concern. Sarah's hand moved to the back of her neck, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she seriously considered revealing the tattoo that she had kept hidden. It's hard to explain, sir. It's not an official organization, but it's made up of people who have been in similar situations, women who have escaped trafficking operations, former law enforcement officers who got tired of corruption, people who understand how to work outside the system when the system is part of the problem. And this network helped you escape? Drill Sergeant Martinez asked. Yes, sir. They helped me gather evidence. They helped me stay safe when my stepfather realized what I was doing. And they helped me disappear when it became clear that I couldn't stay in my hometown. They also helped me understand that joining the military was probably the safest way to build a new life while still being able to help other people who might find themselves in similar situations. The room fell silent again as both men processed what Sarah had told them. Finally, Drill Sergeant Martinez spoke. Martinez, this is far beyond anything I'm equipped to handle. I'm going to have to report this conversation to my commanding officer, and he's probably going to want to involve military intelligence and possibly federal agencies. Sarah's heart sank. Sir, does that mean I'll be discharged from the program? I don't know, Drill Sergeant Martinez said honestly. It means that people much higher up the chain of command than me are going to have to decide whether having you in the military creates more risks or more opportunities. What do you mean by opportunities? Davidson asked. Drill Sergeant Martinez looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been respect. Think about it, Davidson. Private Martinez has information about organized crime operations, experience with undercover work, and connections to a network of people who specialize in helping victims of human trafficking. Those aren't exactly common qualifications among Army recruits. Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Sir, I joined the Army because I wanted to serve my country and because I needed a safe place to build a new life. But I also joined because I thought my experiences might be valuable in helping other people who find themselves in dangerous situations. What about your family? Davidson asked. Your mother? Your brother? Are they safe? Sarah's expression darkened. My mother died in a car accident 6 months after I left. The police said it was just an accident, but the network told me that accidents like that aren't usually accidents. My brother was placed in foster care, and the network is keeping an eye on him to make sure he stays safe. Davidson shook his head in disbelief. Jesus, Martinez, I'm sorry. I had no idea. How could you? Sarah replied. I never told anyone. I couldn't tell anyone. The fewer people who know the details, the safer everyone is. Drill Sergeant Martinez stood up. All right, here's what's going to happen. Davidson, you're going to go back to the barracks and you're going to tell anyone who asks that this was a minor disciplinary issue that got resolved. You're not going to repeat anything you heard in this room to anyone. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Davidson replied immediately. Martinez, you're going to report to Colonel Peterson's office at 0800 tomorrow morning. In the meantime, you're restricted to base and you're not to discuss this conversation with anyone else. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Sarah said, though she felt like her world was collapsing around her once again. As they left the drill sergeant's office, Davidson walked beside Sarah in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Martinez, I owe you an apology. I thought you were being stuck up or antisocial. I had no idea you were dealing with something like that. You couldn't have known, Sarah replied. And you weren't wrong about me being antisocial. I am. I have to be. But now that I know why, Davidson trailed off, seeming to struggle with what to say. Look, I know I can't understand what you've been through, but if there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, just let me know. Sarah looked at him with surprise. Thank you. That means more than you know. As they approached the barracks, Davidson stopped walking. Martinez, can I ask you something? That tattoo you keep hiding? Does it have something to do with all this? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. It's a symbol that connects me to the network that helped me. It's not something I can show casually, because there are people who would recognize it and understand what it means. People who might want to hurt you. People who might want to hurt a lot of people, Sarah corrected. The network operates in secret for a reason. The moment it becomes public knowledge, it stops being effective and starts being dangerous. Davidson nodded thoughtfully. I won't say anything to anyone, but Martinez, maybe it's time to stop hiding so much. Maybe the people here, the people who are going to be your brothers and sisters in arms, maybe they deserve to know enough about who you are to understand why you're worth trusting. As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet sounds of the barracks, she thought about Davidson's words. For weeks, she had been trying to build a new life by keeping her old life completely separate. But maybe that wasn't possible. Maybe the experiences that had driven her to join the army were exactly the experiences that would make her valuable as a soldier. Tomorrow she would meet with Colonel Peterson, and her future in the military would be decided by people who understood the bigger picture in ways that she couldn't. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Sarah felt like she wasn't completely alone. Davidson knew her story now, and he had chosen to offer support instead of judgment. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. She touched the small tattoo on the back of her neck and thought about the women in the network who had helped her escape, who had taught her that survival sometimes required becoming someone else entirely. They had prepared her for this moment even if she hadn't realized it at the time. Now she would find out whether their training and her courage would be enough to build the life she had been fighting for. Sarah stood at attention outside Colonel Peterson's office at exactly 0800 hours, her uniform pressed to perfection, and her mind racing through every possible outcome of the meeting ahead. She had barely slept the night before, alternating between hope that her honesty would be seen as an asset and fear that her complicated background would end her military career before it truly began. The door opened, and a stern-looking woman in her 50s gestured for Sarah to enter. "Private Martinez, please come in." Sarah stepped into the office and was surprised to find that Colonel Peterson wasn't alone. 3 other people were seated around a small conference table, a man in a military intelligence uniform, a woman in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of a federal agent, and another colonel whose insignia Sarah didn't recognize. "At ease, Private," Colonel Peterson said. "Please, have a seat." Sarah sat in the empty chair facing the panel of officials, trying to keep her expression calm while her heart hammered in her chest. Colonel Peterson opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across the table. "Private Martinez, we've spent the last 18 hours verifying the information you shared with Drill Sergeant Martinez yesterday. I have to say, your story checked out in ways that were both impressive and concerning." The woman in civilian clothes leaned forward. "Private Martinez, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. Before we continue, I want you to know that you're not in any legal trouble. In fact, the information you provided 2 years ago through unofficial channels helped us build cases against several individuals who are now serving federal prison sentences for human trafficking and racketeering." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by confusion. "Ma'am, I was told that nothing came of the information I provided. I was told that the case never went anywhere." "That's what we wanted you to think," Agent Chen replied, "and it's what we wanted the criminal organization to think as well. When cases involve corruption at the local level, we sometimes have to work very carefully to protect our sources while we build evidence. Your information was crucial, but we couldn't let anyone know that we were using it." The military intelligence officer spoke up. "Private Martinez, the network that helped you escape and relocate has been on our radar for several years, not because they're doing anything illegal, but because they're remarkably effective at operations that parallel some of our own intelligence work. They've helped dozens of people disappear safely. They've gathered intelligence on criminal organizations that law enforcement couldn't penetrate, and they've done it all while staying completely off the official books." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that information. The network had always been described to her as a loose collection of people helping other people, not as an organization that was sophisticated enough to attract attention from military intelligence. Colonel Peterson continued reading from her file. "Private Martinez, your background check revealed some interesting details that weren't in your initial application. You speak fluent Spanish and competent Portuguese. You have demonstrated skills in surveillance, evidence gathering, and operational security that are well beyond what we would expect from a civilian. And you have connections to people and information that could be extremely valuable to military intelligence operations. Ma'am, I don't understand what you're asking me, Sarah said carefully. The second colonel spoke for the first time. Private Martinez, I'm Colonel Williams from Special Operations Command. What we're asking you is whether you would be interested in a different kind of military career than the one you originally applied for. Sarah felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. What kind of career, sir? Agent Chen pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. Do you recognize this symbol? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The photograph showed a tattoo identical to the one on the back of her neck. Yes, ma'am. That's the symbol of the network. This photograph was taken from a woman we arrested last month in connection with a human trafficking operation in California. She claimed that she was undercover, working to gather evidence against the traffickers. When we investigated her story, we discovered that she was telling the truth. She had been placed in that operation by the same network that helped you escape from Arizona. Colonel Williams leaned forward. Private Martinez, what we've learned is that your network isn't just helping people escape dangerous situations. They're actively working to disrupt criminal organizations from the inside. They're placing people in positions where they can gather intelligence, document crimes, and help other victims escape. Sarah thought about the women who had trained her, who had taught her how to document evidence without being detected, how to communicate secretly, and how to disappear when necessary. She had assumed that they were teaching her survival skills. It had never occurred to her that they might be teaching her intelligence skills. The tattoo, Agent Chen continued, isn't just a symbol of membership. It's a way for network members to identify each other in dangerous situations. It's also a way for law enforcement to identify people who might have valuable information or specialized skills. Colonel Peterson closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. Private Martinez, your original plan was to complete basic training, serve your enlistment as a regular soldier, and build a quiet life away from your past. That's still an option. Your performance has been exemplary, and you would make an excellent addition to any unit in the Army. But, Colonel Williams continued, you also have the option to use your background and skills in ways that could make a much bigger difference. Special Operations Command is always looking for people with your particular combination of language skills, cultural knowledge, and operational experience. Sarah felt overwhelmed. Sir, what exactly would that mean? What would I be asked to do? Agent Chen answered. Initially, it would mean additional training beyond basic training. Language enhancement, advanced surveillance techniques, undercover operations, and intelligence analysis. Eventually, it could mean being placed in situations where you could help identify and disrupt human trafficking operations, both domestically and internationally. You would essentially be doing the same kind of work you were doing with the network, Colonel Williams added, but with official backing, better resources, and the full protection of the United States military. Sarah was quiet for several long minutes, processing everything she had been told. Finally, she spoke. What about the other recruits in my training company? What would they be told about why I'm being reassigned? Colonel Peterson smiled slightly. Private Martinez, one of the things we've been most impressed with is how you've handled the social dynamics of basic training. According to Drill Sergeant Martinez, your conversation with Private Davidson yesterday resulted in him becoming one of your strongest supporters. He's been telling other recruits that they misjudged you and that you're exactly the kind of person they want watching their backs in a dangerous situation. He told them about my background? Sarah asked with alarm. No, Agent Chen replied. He told them that you had survived difficult circumstances that you couldn't discuss for security reasons, and that anyone who questioned your loyalty was an idiot. Apparently, that was enough to change the entire dynamic of your training company. Colonel Williams nodded. Private Martinez, one of the most important skills in special operations is the ability to earn trust and build rapport with people who initially view you with suspicion. You've already demonstrated that ability under extremely challenging circumstances. Sarah thought about the past few weeks, about the isolation and the suspicion and the constant fear that her secrets would be discovered. But she also thought about Davidson's apology, about Jessica's quiet support, and about the other recruits who had started including her in conversations after Davidson's endorsement. If I choose the special operations path, Sarah asked, would I still be able to maintain relationships with the people in my current training company? For security reasons, your training would be classified and your assignments would be need to know, Colonel Peterson replied. But you would still be a soldier in the United States Army. And the bonds you form with other soldiers would still be valid and important, Agent Chen added. Private Martinez, the network that helped you has been doing important work, but they've been limited by their unofficial status. They can't make arrests, they can't access certain kinds of information, and they can't provide official protection for the people they help. By working with us, you could have access to all of those resources. Sarah took a deep breath. Ma'am, can I ask about my brother? About his safety? Your brother is safe, Agent Chen said firmly. He's in a good foster home with a family that's been carefully vetted. The network is still monitoring his situation, and now we are too. If you choose to work with us, we can provide additional protection and resources to ensure that he continues to be safe. The room fell silent as Sarah considered her options. She could continue with her original plan, complete basic training, and spend her enlistment as a regular soldier in a regular unit. It would be a good life, a safe life, and it would give her the fresh start she had been looking for. Or she could embrace the skills and experiences that she had tried so hard to leave behind and use them to help other people who were trapped in the same kinds of situations that she had escaped from. It would be more dangerous, more complicated, and it would mean continuing to live with secrets that she couldn't share with most people. But it would also mean that her mother's death and her own suffering would have meaning beyond just survival. It would mean that the network's investment in her training and escape would pay dividends in ways that could help countless other victims. Sir, Sarah said finally, addressing Colonel Williams, if I choose the special operations path, would I be able to help the network continue their work? Would I be able to maintain those connections? Not only would you be able to maintain those connections, Colonel Williams replied, you would be able to strengthen them. We would provide resources and support that would make their operations more effective and safer for everyone involved. Sarah thought about the women who had risked their own safety to help her escape, who had taught her skills that she hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. She thought about other young women who might be facing the same impossible choices that she had faced, who might need the same kind of help that had saved her life. Most importantly, she thought about the tattoo on her neck and what it really represented. It wasn't just a mark of survival or membership in a secret organization. It was a promise that she would use her freedom to help others find their own freedom. Colonel Williams, Sarah said, sitting up straighter in her chair, I would be honored to serve in Special Operations Command. When do I start? The panel exchanged glances, and Sarah caught a look of satisfaction on Colonel Peterson's face. Private Martinez, you'll complete basic training with your current company. Your performance and your relationships with your fellow recruits are important for your cover story and for your own development as a soldier. After graduation, you'll report to Fort Bragg for additional training. Agent Chen smiled. Private Martinez, welcome to a very select group of people who work to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Your courage in coming forward with your story has already made a difference, and I have no doubt that your service will save lives. As Sarah walked back to the training area, she felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes. The other recruits were preparing for their morning run, and several of them waved to her as she approached. Davidson jogged over to her with a concerned expression. How did it go? He asked quietly. Better than I expected, Sarah replied honestly. I can't talk about the details, but I think everything is going to work out. Good, David said. Because we've got your back, Martinez. Whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to deal with it alone anymore. As Sarah changed into her PT gear and prepared to join the morning run, she realized that Davidson was right. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. She had fellow soldiers who trusted her, superiors who valued her skills, and a mission that would allow her to turn her painful past into a powerful future. The tattoo on her neck no longer felt like a secret she had to hide. It felt like a badge of honor that connected her to a community of people who understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought in shadows, and that sometimes the greatest service comes from helping people who have been forgotten by everyone else. As the group began their morning run, Sarah settled into the familiar rhythm that had carried her through so many difficult miles. But this time, she wasn't running away from anything. She was running toward a future where her survival would become the foundation for helping others survive, and where the skills that had kept her alive would be used to save lives. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in formation with her training company on the parade ground at Fort Benning, wearing her dress blue uniform, and feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. The Georgia sun was beating down on the assembled recruits, their families, and the officers who had come to witness their graduation from basic training, but Sarah barely noticed the heat. She was too focused on the magnitude of what this moment represented. Around her, she could hear the quiet conversations of recruits who were discussing their assignments and their plans for the future. Some were excited about their advanced training programs, others were nervous about their first duty stations, and a few were already making plans to meet up during leave periods. Sarah listened to these conversations with a mixture of happiness for her fellow soldiers and sadness that her own path would be very different from theirs. "Martinez," Jessica whispered from her position in formation, "have you heard anything about your assignment yet? I know you said it was classified, but I was hoping you could at least tell us where you're going." Sarah kept her eyes forward and her voice low. "Fort Bragg for additional training. After that, I'm not sure." "Lucky," said Stevens, who was standing behind them. "Fort Bragg is where all the special operations people train. That's some serious stuff." Sarah had grown closer to her fellow recruits over the past 6 weeks than she had expected to when she first arrived. After her confrontation with Davidson and the subsequent meeting with Colonel Peterson, word had somehow spread through the training company that Sarah had a background that explained her mysterious behavior. Nobody knew the details, but they all understood that she had survived something significant, and that her secretiveness was necessary rather than antisocial. The change in how people treated her had been remarkable. Instead of viewing her as aloof or untrustworthy, the other recruits began seeing her as someone who had already been tested by life and had proven her strength. They started seeking her advice on difficult training exercises, asking for help with skills that came naturally to her, and including her in conversations and activities that she had previously avoided. Davidson, in particular, had become one of her strongest supporters. He had never asked for additional details about her background, but he had made it clear to everyone in their unit that anyone who questioned Sarah's loyalty or commitment would have to answer to him. Coming from someone of his size and presence, that endorsement carried significant weight. "Attention!" called out the sergeant major, and the entire formation snapped to attention as Colonel Peterson and the other graduation speakers took their positions on the platform in front of the assembled recruits. As the ceremony began, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed since that first day when she stepped off the bus feeling lost and alone. She had not only survived basic training, but she had excelled in ways that had surprised even her. More importantly, she had learned that it was possible to build trust and friendship without revealing every detail of her past. The key had been finding the balance between privacy and openness. She couldn't tell people about the network, about her stepfather's criminal activities, or about the specific circumstances that had forced her to leave home. But she could tell them that she had survived difficult circumstances, that she was committed to serving her country, and that she valued their friendship even if she couldn't share everything about herself. Colonel Peterson stepped up to the microphone to address the graduating class. "Soldiers," she began, "today marks the end of your transformation from civilians to members of the United States Army. You have proven that you have the physical strength, mental toughness, and moral character necessary to serve your country with honor." Sarah listened to the colonel's words and thought about the conversations she had had with Agent Chen and Colonel Williams over the past several weeks. They had briefed her on some of the missions she might be asked to participate in, and the scope of the work was both exciting and intimidating. She would be working to identify and disrupt human trafficking operations, but she would also be involved in broader counterintelligence operations that could take her anywhere in the world. "Some of you will serve in traditional military roles," Colonel Peterson continued, "providing security, support, and defense for American interests around the globe. Others will serve in specialized roles that require unique skills and exceptional dedication. All of you will serve with honor." As the colonel spoke about service and sacrifice, Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to the back of her neck, where her tattoo remained hidden beneath her uniform collar. In a few hours, she would be leaving Fort Benning and reporting to Fort Bragg for training that would prepare her for missions she couldn't have imagined when she first decided to join the Army. But more importantly, she would be connecting with the network in official ways that would provide them with resources and support they had never had before. Agent Chen had explained that Sarah would serve as a liaison between the network and federal law enforcement, helping to coordinate operations and share intelligence in ways that would make both organizations more effective. "Private Martinez," Colonel Peterson called out. And Sarah realized that individual awards were being presented. She stepped forward as her name was called, wondering what kind of recognition she could possibly be receiving. Private Sarah Martinez has demonstrated exceptional performance in all areas of basic training, Colonel Peterson announced as Sarah stood at attention in front of the entire formation. Her scores in physical fitness, weapons training, and leadership exercises place her in the top 5% of her class. More importantly, she has demonstrated the kind of moral courage and personal integrity that exemplifies the best traditions of the United States Army. Sarah felt her cheeks burning as applause erupted from the assembled crowd. This was exactly the kind of attention she had spent her entire life trying to avoid, but she realized that this attention was different. This was recognition for her accomplishments and her character, not scrutiny of her background or her secrets. Private Martinez will be continuing her service with specialized training at Fort Bragg, Colonel Peterson continued. We are confident that she will continue to serve with the same distinction that has marked her basic training experience. As Sarah returned to her position in formation, she caught Davidson's eye and saw him grinning at her with obvious pride. Jessica gave her a thumbs up, and several other recruits nodded approvingly. These people had become her friends and her comrades, and their support meant more to her than any official recognition. After the ceremony concluded and families began gathering with their newly graduated soldiers, Sarah found herself surrounded by her fellow recruits who wanted to congratulate her and say goodbye. She had expected this moment to be awkward, since she had no family present and her future assignments were classified, but instead it felt like a celebration. "Martinez," Davidson said, pulling her into a bear hug that lifted her off the ground, "you better keep in touch. I want to hear about all the cool stuff you'll be doing, even if you can't tell me what it is." "I'll try," Sarah replied, surprised by how emotional she felt about saying goodbye to these people who had started as strangers and had become something like family. Jessica approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm going to miss having you as a roommate," she said. "You taught me that quiet people aren't always hiding something bad. Sometimes they're just carrying something heavy." As the goodbyes continued, Sarah realized that she had learned something important about herself during basic training. She had always believed that her survival depended on staying invisible, on avoiding connections that could be used against her or that could put other people in danger. But she had discovered that it was possible to form meaningful relationships while still maintaining necessary boundaries. Later that evening, as Sarah packed her gear for the trip to Fort Bragg, she found a letter that had been slipped into her footlocker. It was from Davidson, and it contained a simple message. "Martinez, whatever you survived before you came here made you stronger than most people will ever be. Don't forget that strength comes from surviving the hard stuff, not from avoiding it. Your friends in Alpha Company will always have your back." The next morning, Sarah boarded a bus bound for North Carolina, carrying her military gear and a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. As the bus pulled away from Fort Benning, she looked out the window at the training grounds where she had spent the past several months discovering what she was capable of. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Welcome to the team, sister. Your real training starts now." Sarah knew the message was from someone in the network, someone who was connected to the operations she would be joining at Fort Bragg. She typed back a simple response, "Ready to serve." The bus ride to Fort Bragg gave Sarah time to think about the journey that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she had been a scared teenager trapped in an impossible situation, with no clear way out and no one to turn to for help. The network had given her an escape route and taught her skills she didn't know she possessed. The Army had given her a purpose and shown her that her painful experiences could become valuable assets. Most importantly, the past few months had taught her that it was possible to honor her commitments to the network while also building new relationships and serving new causes. She didn't have to choose between her past and her future. She could integrate them in ways that made both more meaningful. When the bus arrived at Fort Bragg, Sarah was met by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Agent Martinez. "Different Martinez," the woman said with a smile. "But we're all family here." As they drove through the base toward the building where Sarah would begin her specialized training, Agent Martinez explained what the next few months would involve. "You'll be learning advanced surveillance techniques, foreign language enhancement, cultural immersion training, and operational planning. But more importantly, You'll be learning how to work with the network in ways that provide official support for their operations while maintaining their security and effectiveness. What will my first assignment be? Sarah asked. There's a trafficking operation in Florida that's been moving young women from Central America through a network of businesses that look legitimate on the surface, Agent Martinez replied. The network has identified a potential infiltration point, but they need someone with official backing who can gather evidence that will hold up in federal court. Sarah felt the familiar surge of determination that came whenever she thought about other people facing the same kinds of dangers she had escaped. When do I start? Agent Martinez smiled. You start today. But first, there's someone who wants to meet you. They pulled up in front of a nondescript office building, and Agent Martinez led Sarah through a series of secure doors to a small conference room. Inside, a woman in her 40s was waiting with a cup of coffee and a warm smile. Sarah, the woman said, standing up and extending her hand, I'm Rebecca. I was one of the people who helped coordinate your escape from Arizona. Sarah shook Rebecca's hand, feeling a rush of emotion at seeing someone from the network face to face for the first time since leaving home. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Thank you, Rebecca replied, for being brave enough to use what we taught you in ways that can help so many other people. Your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished. As Sarah settled into her chair and prepared to learn about her first official mission, she thought about the tattoo on her neck and what it had come to represent. It was no longer a secret she had to hide or a burden she had to carry alone. It was a symbol of her connection to a community of people who understood that sometimes the most important work happens in shadows, and that sometimes the greatest service comes from helping people who have been forgotten by everyone else. But now that symbol also connected her to something larger, the United States Army, federal law enforcement, and a mission that would allow her to use all of her skills and experiences to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The scared teenager who had left Arizona was gone, replaced by a soldier who had found her purpose and her place in the world. The conversation with Rebecca and Agent Martinez lasted for several hours, covering operational details, security protocols, and long-term strategic objectives. As Sarah listened and asked questions, she realized that her training at Fort Benning had been just the beginning. The real work, the work that would define her military career and her contribution to the network, was just starting. When the meeting concluded, Sarah stepped outside into the North Carolina evening air and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The past would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the only part. The future stretched ahead of her, full of challenges and opportunities to make a difference in ways she was only beginning to understand. The tattoo on her neck was no longer a secret. It was a promise that she intended to keep.